Om Vishwandarpana Drishyamana Nagari Tulyannijantargatam Pashyannatmani Mayaya Bahirivod Bhutan Yatha Nidraya Yasakshat Kurute Prabodha Samaye Swatmanamevadvayam Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Nama Idam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. Om Narayanam Padmabhuvam Vasishtham Shaktin cha Tatputra Parasharan cha Vyasan Shukam Gaudapadam Mahantam Govinda Yogindra Mathasya Shishyam Shri Shankaracharya Mathasya Padma Padancha Hasta Malakancha Shishyam Tantotakam Vartikakaramanyaan अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठं अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ I welcome you all to the 14th class, the Fundamentals of Vedanta series. We have been looking into the question. Sorry, there's some sound coming. Is someone trying to speak? Okay. So we have been looking into the question of how an adhikari becomes an adhikari. We said that the adhikari has to satisfy three criteria. One is that the adhikari has to be a mumukshuhu, means a person who's directly seeking this purnatva. Second is that the adhikari must be a jignasuhu, somebody who sees the indispensable connection between the study of Vedanta and the prayojanam, which is the purnatvam. And the third is that the adhikari should have certain qualifications, a certain preparedness of mind. So in order to answer the question how the adhikari becomes the adhikari, we are in the process of answering these three questions. How does the adhikari become a mumukshuhu? How does the adhikari become a jignasuhu? And how does the adhikari gain these additional qualifications? We have already answered the first two questions. How does the adhikari become a mumukshuhu? And how does the adhikari become a jignasuhu? How does the adhikari become a mumukshuhu? We said the adhikari becomes a mumukshuhu by discovering the problem of samsara. What is this problem of samsara that the adhikari discovers? It is the discovery that the struggle to try to gain purnatvam out of the first three purusharthas is never ending. It is futile. So this person who discovers the problem of samsara, we said that this person is a karma yogi, somebody who has adopted this attitude of Ishwararpana buddhihi and prasada buddhihi, and through these attitudes, through the process of karma yoga, by adopting the lifestyle of karma yoga, this person neutralizes the likes and dislikes and comes to a point where this person begins to see objectively that the first three purusharthas, the pursuit of the first three purusharthas has these three doshas, dukkha mishritatvam, that they are mixed with sorrow, atriptikaratvam, that they leave me unfulfilled, apurnaha, and bandhakatvam, meaning that they make me more and more dependent on the world for my fulfillment. And he knows that depending on the world is a bad idea because the world is unpredictable, uncontrollable, and unsustainable. So then this person begins to question, is there something else that can give me this purnatvam? And when he comes to that point, the Veda Purva tells him that yes, there is, but it is not me who can give you this. I have given you whatever I can. I have given you artha, kamaha, and dharmaha. But now what you are seeking is moksha, and for that you need to approach Vedanta. So this is how the person becomes a mumukshu, a seeker of moksha. The next question is, how does this person get motivated to study Vedanta? In order to get motivated to study Vedanta, one must be a jigyasuhu. Jigyasuhu means a seeker of knowledge. So how does this seeker of moksha become a seeker of knowledge? So when this person comes to Vedanta, the person is in for a surprise, as we said, or perhaps even a shock. What Vedanta tells him, that this moksha that you are seeking, you cannot really gain it. This moksha, you cannot really gain it because it is your very nature. This purnatvam is your very nature. And the only reason you are seeking for it is because you are ignorant of your own nature. So the problem is self-ignorance. And we saw the story of the 10th man. The 10th man was searching for himself, even though he himself was the 10th man. Similarly, the jiva, who is ignorant of his own nature as being purna, is seeking for this purnatvam. We saw all of those similarities between the 10th man's struggle and the jiva's struggle. And finally, what solves the problem is knowledge. And the 10th man gains the knowledge that I myself am the 10th man. Similarly, the jiva has to gain this knowledge that I am Purna. This is very much a case of accomplishing the already accomplished. In this case, what is being sought is already accomplished. And what is already accomplished, one thinks it is not accomplished because of ignorance of what is already accomplished. And therefore, the only way of accomplishing something that is already accomplished, the only way of accomplishing something that is already accomplished is only through knowledge that it is already accomplished. There is no other way. So this clarity has to be there in this seeker. And when he sees that the root cause of my samsara is my own ignorance, that is when he becomes a jigyasu, seeker of knowledge. So we saw that I know I am. So I have this samanya jnanam about myself, but I lack the vishesha jnanam of who I am. And when I have the samanya jnanam, but I lack the vishesha jnanam, then exactly like a rope, instead of being, there is something there. There's samanya jnanam that there is something there, but there is lack of vishesha jnanam that it is the rope. And when there is samanya jnanam but lack of vishesha jnanam, then there is a superimposition of the snake upon the rope. I mistake it basically. When I don't know something for what it really is, I invariably make a mistake. So similarly, I don't know who I am. I know I am there, but I don't know who I am. And in this situation, the conditions are ripe for a mistake. Basically, I make a mistake about myself. I start superimposing the attributes of the body and the mind upon myself. I say, I am tall, I am short, I am happy, I am sad, I am depressed. and finally end up saying, I am Apurnaha. So this I am Apurnaha is a superimposition as a result of my ignorance. And if I take this I am Apurnaha to be a fact, and then I try to build upon it by acting according to it, then those actions, whatever I engage in, that will never lead me to this Purnatvam, because whatever I accomplish, I still continue to remain Apurnaha in my vision, because the ignorance persists. Nothing that I have done is really opposed to ignorance. Nothing really destroys the ignorance. So that is why a mumukshuhu has to become a jignasuhu. If a mumukshuhu doesn't become a jignasuhu, like we said, the mumukshuhu can get into a spiritual samsara also, where one thinks that one day I will gain a certain experience. And when I gain that experience, I will gain moksha. This is like the 10th man saying that one day I will find the 10th man. Now, whatever the 10th man finds, suppose from a distance he sees somebody who is dressed similar to the other students, and he says, finally I have found the 10th man. If he says this, and if he approaches this 10th man, very soon he will discover he is the 11th man. He is not the 10th man he is really looking for. Because the 10th man is himself. So whatever he finds is not the 10th man. Similarly, if somebody finds something and says, I have gained moksha, we say that is not the moksha. The only moksha that one can gain is one that is not really gained, but only as though gained. How is it gained? How is it as though gained? But through knowledge that my moksha is already accomplished. Therefore, a mumukshu needs to mandatorily become a jignasu. Once we come to this point, then it is clear that knowledge is the solution. But then there are still these questions about how do I gain this knowledge? So in order to know how do I gain this knowledge, what is the means for this knowledge, we have to do a certain inquiry into what knowledge really is. Because there is a lot of ideas, vague ideas associated with knowledge. And there is a lot of mysticism, mystical ideas associated with this. That is why we need to do an inquiry into what is knowledge and what are the various means of knowledge. And then which of those means of knowledge are applicable to self-knowledge? And finally, what is the means of self-knowledge? So this is the inquiry we got into in the last class. So when we look at what is knowledge, we had taken the example of this pot. We said the pot is initially unknown to me. But then the moment my organ, my sense organ of vision comes in contact with this pot, then we said that there is a certain modification of the mind that takes place in the shape of this pot. Modification of the mind. And what does this modification of the mind do? We said it does two things. Vishaya avarana nivrittihi. It removes the covering of the ignorance that was enveloping the pot. So when I say I don't know the pot, there is it is enveloped by ignorance. It is covered by ignorance. So what this vrittihi, this modification of the mind does is it does two things. Vishaya avarana nivrittihi. It removes this covering. And Vishaya prakashaha, that the pot shines in my consciousness. And that is when I say, this is a pot and I know the pot. So we said this is knowledge, the modification of the mind in the form of the object. This is what gives rise to knowledge. So we said the knowledge always takes place in the mind only, in the intellect. There is no such thing called dental knowledge or cranial knowledge, etc. So this intellectual knowledge the intellectual adjective is unnecessary. We talked about this. So now we said this phrase knowledge or jnanam generally applies to various things, not just valid knowledge. It may be valid knowledge, it may be invalid knowledge, or it may even be recollection of something I am known. So all of these can come under this general term called knowledge, jnanam. So then we looked at what is valid knowledge. Sri Krishna, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, my apologies for interrupting again.
Sure.
So when we see a pot, if I have never seen a pot earlier, I can see something. My mind will also see it, but I can't recognize that it is a pot.
Right.
Unless I have seen a pot earlier and someone had taught me that something in the
Yes.
shape and form of a pot is a pot, I recognize it as a pot.
Right.
Right. So when you say that our mind makes that perception of a pot, it is this knowledge that something which is in this shape and form is to be called a pot, and it is to be used for ABC reasons, right? For purposes.
Exactly.
Okay. Fine. Understood. So
there is
I
certain. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you know why I'm asking this question, right? I mean, so if we need to recognize that we are Purnatvam, until we know that this is what is Purnatvam, it will be difficult for us to also recognize that this is Purnatvam, if and when we encounter it.
Yes, that's a good question. That's a valid question. So basically, what you're talking about is that a certain preparation of the mind is required before that the knowledge about the nature of a certain thing can occur. So there has to be a certain preparation. This is true of even we talked about, the 8th standard student, for example, sitting in the E is equal to MC squared class. So whatever is being talked about might largely sound as gibberish. So there is a certain preparation of the mind that is required before the professor can say E is equal to MC square, and then he says, aha, now I know what it is, right? So similarly, when the guru teaches that you are that Purnatvam, before that some of this teaching has to take place for one to recognize that this is what the guru means, right? So yes, you are right, and yes, a very valid point. So now, coming back to where we were, so we talked about this knowledge always taking place in the mind. And we were discussing now what is valid knowledge. So we discussed two characteristics of valid knowledge. Because it said pramatvam, anadhigata, abaditartha vishayaka jnanatvam, atvam anadhigadabhaditartha vishayaka jnanatvam. So here we talked about two things. The first one is abadhita, meaning that whatever is valid knowledge that cannot be contradicted, that cannot be negated. If I have seen a rope as a snake, then a subsequent investigation, when I shed some light on it, that reveals it is a rope. It contradicts what I had seen earlier. So that knowledge is badhitam, that is contradicted, negated, sublated. Therefore, it cannot be prama, it cannot be valid knowledge. So valid knowledge stands as valid until it is contradicted by something. Only when it is contradicted, we know it is invalid. So valid knowledge should remain uncontradicted. Basically, that's what we are saying, abadhitam. The next thing we said is anadhigatam, because we want to exclude recollection. Recollection can never be a means of valid knowledge. So if I'm recalling something I have known earlier, then that is adhigatam, already known. So if I have to exclude recollection, then we say anadhikatam. Therefore, anadhigata, abadhita. These are the two key characteristics of Brahma. Now, one thing to note here is that when we talk about validity, I did not get into this point in the last class, but I thought I'll clarify this here. And what does this validity really mean? For example, let us take the seeing a rope. So I see a rope, and I say this is a rope. But what is really there are fabrics of strings of jute. Strings of jute are wound together. That is what is there. So one may say, hey, what you're saying, this is a rope, is not valid. These are strings of jute that are intertwined together. Or a scientist may come and say that what you're calling strings of jute is not really valid. What is there are really some hydrocarbon molecules. That is what he will say. And in the ultimate analysis, what Vedanta says is what is really there is Brahman only. Only Brahman. If Brahman is the ultimate reality, then everything is Brahman. So, if you start doing this kind of a process as to what is really there, then everything that we call knowledge will become invalid. So, what we add here is a caveat that when we say valid, we are talking about it in the form of general vyavahara, in the transactional world. So we are talking about knowledge in the transactional world, not in the absolute sense. Because in the absolute sense, everything becomes negated if one knows this is really Brahman. Therefore, this validity is in the transactional sense, in the vyavaharika world. This clarification I wanted to add. So when we talk about negation of this earlier thing that I talked valid, when I talk about its negation, that is also in the transactional sense only. Earlier I had mistaken the rope to be a snake in the transactional sense. And later on, I negate that transactional knowledge that it is a snake with a more valid transactional knowledge that it is a rope. So the invalidity that we are talking about is in the transactional sense. So this clarification I wanted to add. So now we said that this unique means of knowledge is called pramanam. What gives rise to this modification is some cause. There has to be some cause for every effect. He said that the mind is there behind all the cognitions. So the mind is also a cause for every cognition. But then there is this visual organ, the organ of seeing. So this is the unique cause for the rise of this cognition. This is support. So this unique cause in any cognition is the asadharana karanam. So this asadharana karanam is called karanam, and pramakaranam is pramanam. This means this unique cause that gives rise to a particular modification of the mind. In this case, the modification of the mind that reveals the color, the form of this thing. So that is the pramanam. So this visual organ that reveals colors to me, that is the pramanam. So there are four factors that we said is there in any cognition. The pramata, the knower. The knower is there. And the prameya, the object is there. So the knower has to come in contact with this object for the knowledge to take place. The pramata and the prameyam. And the intermediaries here is the pramanam. The pramata has to use this pramanam, the means of knowledge, in order to contact the prameya, the object of knowledge, and that gives rise to the prama, which is the valid knowledge. So we formulated the first principle of knowledge, the first knowledge principle. What is the first knowledge principle? That when an appropriate and adequate pramanam comes in contact with the prameyam, then the prama, the valid knowledge, takes place in the pramata. It is spontaneous. There is no will involved, we said. We said, what is appropriate? The appropriate pramanam is something that is aligned, that is appropriate to the knowledge that I want to gain. So if I have to gain the knowledge of colors, I have to use my visual organ. I cannot insist that I will use my auditory organ, my organ of hearing, and gain knowledge of colors. That is impossible. That is why the pramana has to be appropriate. Similarly, the operation of the pramana has to be adequate. Adequate meaning there has to be no obstruction in the operation of the pramana. So this lack of light, for example, is an obstruction in the operation of the pramana. When there is an obstruction, that is when I mistake the rope for the snake. Similarly, there might be a cataract in the eye. That is also an obstruction in the pramana. So the operation of the pramana has to be adequate. And when these conditions are met, the appropriate and adequate pramana contacts the prameya, then the knowledge takes place. And we said, even if I don't will the knowledge to take place, it still takes place. We saw this example of Chaturthyam Chandro na drashtavya. On the Chaturthi, he doesn't want to see the moon because there is this thing that says seeing the moon is inauspicious. But accidentally his visual organ comes in contact with the moon. Then he says, yo, this happened. Even though he did not intend to see it. We said this, the will is suspended. The operation of the will, whether you will or don't will is immaterial. This is the law. So this is the first knowledge principle. Now what happens here is you can say that there are two corollaries to the knowledge principle. One is that valid knowledge cannot take place without employing an appropriate and adequate pramana. So for valid knowledge to take place, the appropriate and adequate pramana is mandatory. And the second is that if an inappropriate or inadequate pramana is used, then the result is either no knowledge or doubt or invalid knowledge. Valid knowledge is not possible. So now, whenever there is an invalid knowledge, right, we can conclude that either an appropriate pramana was not used or the pramana that was used was inadequate. Basically, if I am seeing the rope as a snake, that time I don't know, right, that I'm making a mistake. But later on, when I do the investigation properly and I see it is actually a rope, then I realize that the reason I saw that I had the invalid knowledge was because of lack of light. So either my pramana was not appropriate or pramana was inadequate. If the causes are addressed, then appropriate knowledge has to take place. If the cause is identified as a cataract, if the cataract is removed, then people report, now I see very clearly. Earlier things that were appearing to be blurred in the book, I could not read it. So no knowledge was taking place. or he might even be mistaking some words. Wrong knowledge was taking place. Now, after the cataract is removed, he says, I see perfectly, I see exactly what is there. So, we say this entire samsara is due to Brahma or Aprama. Basically, I have not used the right, appropriate means of knowledge to know myself. It is the root of the problem. And therefore, the knowledge that has arisen in my mind about myself is aprama. It is Brahma. And therefore, I come to this conclusion that I am Apurna. This I am Apurna is a conclusion that has come because I have not used the right means of knowledge to know myself. So this is a result of this first principle of knowledge and its corollary, that if an inappropriate or inadequate means of knowledge is used, the result is invalid knowledge in this case. So this is the first knowledge principle. Now we come to the second knowledge principle. The second knowledge principle is that when an appropriate and adequate pramanam comes in contact with the prameya, the object of knowledge, then the prama, the knowledge that takes place, cannot be willed to be any different. See, the first knowledge principle said that knowledge takes place. You don't have a choice in the matter whether knowledge takes place or not. The second knowledge principle is that the knowledge that takes place cannot be willed to be any different. So, the knowledge is not dependent on the will of the knower. The form of the knowledge is not dependent on the will of the knower, but it is dependent on the object. So this is called jnanam or prama. Prama is vastu tantram. Vastu tantram, natu purusha tantram. So this is a very important principle of knowledge. Very important to understand this. See, this word tantram means dependent on. We are all familiar with this word called swatantram. Swatantrata divas, we say. Swatantrata divasa. So what does mean Independence Day? So Swatantrata means independence. Swatantram, that means actually dependent on myself. Tantram means dependent. So Swatantram means dependent on myself. India wanted to be dependent on herself. And therefore, India had this freedom struggle. Why? We wanted freedom from Paratantram, being dependent on the British. They were ruling the country. We wanted to rule our country ourselves. So Swatantram. Similarly, Vastu Tantram means dependent on the object. Purusha Tantram means dependent on the person, on the individual. So we said knowledge is not dependent on the will of the individual, it is dependent on the object. If we take action, the action is Purusha Tantra. If I want to go from here to Kanyakumari, let us say, then I can either go via Kochi or I can go via Kumbhakonam. And I can take a flight, or I can go by train or bus or car, or I can even walk. So the means, the action has so many means of being accomplished. When I want to accomplish something, and when action is required, there are various means to accomplish it. So this depends totally on the person. Somebody may take a flight, somebody may take a car. So one may choose as one wills. It is dependent on the will. But we say that this knowledge, it is not dependent on the will of the individual. So in the action, I use my organs of action, karmendriyas, like my hands and the feet to accomplish the action. And like we said, the action depends on the will of the individual. Now the action can have four results, we say. One is aptihi. Aptihi meaning reaching a certain place. Like, for example, I want to go to Kanyakumari. Reaching Kanyakumari, aptihi is a result of action. The other is utpattihi. The pot is not there, but then I create the pot, utpattihi. The third is samskaraha, is purification. A cloth is dirty, so I wash the cloth. I have to scrub it, apply some soap, etc. I wash the cloth. This is samskaraha. And the fourth is vikaraha, is modification. There's a white cloth, and then I can dye it as red or blue or whatever. This is modification. So an action can accomplish these four results. Every result that an action accomplishes comes under these four categories only. This is aptihi, reaching, utpattihi, production, samskaraha, purification, and vikaraha, modification. Now, this action, one of the four results is not, these four things can never destroy ignorance, as we said. Because they are not inimical to ignorance, they are not opposed to ignorance. And therefore, any of these four results will always leave ignorance untouched. And then let us contrast this with knowledge. Now we said action is a result of my karmendriyas, the operation of my hands, feet, etc. But sometimes there is even this mental action. There is also a mental action like japa, etc. Now that is classified as mental action. It comes under upasana. So all upasanas are also mental action only. Therefore, knowledge, we want to contrast it saying it's not a mental action either. This is also a consequence of this second knowledge principle. Knowledge is not a mental action because an action is dependent on the will of the knower. So, for example, I may say I want to do a certain japa, or I see for the moment I see Mahavishnu in the Salagrama, or in the Shivalinga I see Shiva. So this is upasana. This we say is upasana. Invoking Shiva in the Saligrama, invoking Shiva in the Shivalinga. That is upasana. That is a mental action. But we say knowledge is not a mental action. And knowledge is not dependent on the will of the knower. It is dependent on the object. So knowledge, we say, is pramana-janyam. It is a product. It arises as a result of the operation of a pramana. A prama arises as the result of operation of a pramana. And knowledge is vastu tantram, dependent on the object, not on the will of the knower. So an apple can only be seen as an apple. That is, I cannot say this apple is an orange. Because the knowledge depends on the object. The object is an apple. The only way it can be really known is as an apple. So now what does knowledge accomplish? So unlike action, which has these four results, aptihi, utpattihi, samskaraha, vikaraha, all that knowledge does is it just reveals what is. Just reveals what is. It doesn't bring about any reaching, any modification, any purification, any production. It doesn't bring about any change in the object of knowledge. All it reveals is what is that object? What is it really? That is what knowledge reveals. And that is why even in English we use this word called discover. So there is a certain covering. All that happens to that covering is discover, right? It disappears. The covering of ignorance around an object, it disappears. That is all that knowledge does. Just removal of ignorance. That is all. So if at all the knowledge brings about a modification, it is a modification in the mind of the knower about what that object is. So this is a very important distinction between a mental action or any action versus knowledge. So if I want to know what the time of day is, for example, then if I do pradakshina around the clock, an action around the clock, or if I sit and do japa about let me know what the time of day is, etc. We say those are all actions. They cannot remove the ignorance of what the time of day is. So what should one do? One has to open my organ, my pramana, my visual organ, and make it come in contact with the clock, and that will reveal what the time is. So a very important distinction between knowledge and action. So if you see the consequence of these first two knowledge principles, the first knowledge principle says that knowledge takes place. I don't have a choice in the matter. The second knowledge principle is that the knowledge that takes place cannot be willed to be any different. So there is this twofold denial of my own choice in the matter. Whether knowledge takes place, I have no choice. And what form the knowledge takes also, I don't have a choice. So consequence of this is that, let's say I am walking. And when I'm walking, in front of me, there is this garbage truck. So now what happens is that the prameya, the garbage is there. And the pramana, my organ of smell is there. And one of the things about my organ of smell is that it's always open. Unlike my eyes that I can close, these are open open always. So there is no obstruction. And the pramana comes in contact with the prameya. So this knowledge of the stink takes place. The first knowledge principle. I don't have a choice. I don't like it, but it takes place. The second knowledge principle is that I want this to be turned into fragrance. Right? Not possible. Because knowledge is vastu tantram. It depends on the object. Therefore, I cannot will it to be different. Therefore, knowledge takes place and knowledge of stink takes place. Therefore, if I don't like it, the only choice I have is to create an obstruction. I close my nostrils. That is creating an obstruction between the pramana and the prameya. When an obstruction is created, what happens? That stink is no longer there. The modification of the mind in the form of the stink is no longer there. So when I create an obstruction, the adequate functioning of the pramana is obstructed. Therefore, I get relief from this. The other way is to move away from this. When I move away also, this moving away, this distance is an obstruction. Therefore, by moving away also, I am creating an obstruction. And therefore, I can get some relief from this. So these are the first two knowledge principles. Now there is this third knowledge principle. It is extremely important. We say that every pramanam, every means of knowledge has inherent validity, inherent reliability, inherent trustworthiness in its own sphere of operation. So every pramana has inherent validity in its own sphere of operation. This is the third knowledge principle. So there are a few implications of this. One is we come to know that every pramana has got its sphere of operation. And in this sphere of operation, this pramana is undisputed. It rules. It rules the sphere of operation. Like we said, anadhigata, right, applies here also. What one pramana reveals in its sphere, right? It is not known by any other pramana because its sphere of operation is different. So what the pramana, the knowledge that a pramana gives it in its sphere of operation cannot be confirmed or contradicted by any other pramana in its sphere of operation. So there are independent spheres of operation, and each pramana rules its sphere of operation. It is undisputed in its sphere of operation. So let us take this example, right? So what my eyes reveal, the colors that my eyes reveal, they cannot be confirmed or contradicted by my ears. The ears have their own sphere of operation, which is the world of sounds. The eyes have their own sphere of operation, which is this world of colors and forms. They are independent, non-overlapping. So this is very important. Now, one may say that you came to know about this principle, right? One may raise one may raise some objection about this. That one day I saw this flyer which said that locally there are some zebras in town. There are some zebras there in the local zoo. So the children got very excited. We have never seen a zebra, so let us go and see a zebra. So then they also read about zebras, etc., and what kind of sound they make, and all of that they read about it. And they all go to the zoo to see this zebra. Now their eyes show that there is this horse-like creature, with black and white stripes, etc. So they're very happy to see this zebra. Then suddenly they hear a neighing sound. They hear the neighing sound. And these children have read in Wikipedia that the zebras make a braying sound more like a donkey. But they hear the neighing sound. And their teacher also accompanies them. And he said, yes, zebras are not supposed to make this sound. They are supposed to make this braying kind of a sound. But what we are hearing is a neighing. So somehow things don't add up. So here you can say that, here there is a situation where what my eyes are revealing, it is a zebra. But then what my ears are hearing is this neighing sound that a zebra is not supposed to make. There is a contradiction. So this is violating your third principle of knowledge, that there should not be any contradiction between these pramanas. So we say that when such a situation happens, the third knowledge principle is still valid. See, we say that this contradiction that you're talking about is only an appearance. It cannot be the reality. You are right that a zebra is a horse-like creature that has black and white stripes. So what your eyes are reporting, if that is taken to be that would be taken, that would what you would see if you see a zebra. But then you are also right that a zebra cannot make this neighing sound. So if your eyes are reporting a neighing sound, then what is there cannot be a zebra, it has to be something else. So now, whenever we say that there is a contradiction between two pramanas, right? Then we say the contradiction can only be an appearance. You are still not known the truth. What you're seeing is only an appearance. So one of the pramanas has to be wrong, or one of the pramanas has to be investigated into to see what is the truth. So now what happened here is that these people were very puzzled by this, right? So a few investigators, they said, let us look into this situation because this is something very different. We have to investigate this. So that should be the attitude whenever we see a contradiction between two pramanas. We say there is need for more investigation. So these people went there, and then these creatures were roaming around in some open area where there was some grass, etc. Right? Suddenly it started to rain at that time. Then what happened is that they saw these colors fading away. So it turned out that the zoo owner, in order to attract a crowd, he had just painted horses as black and white. So the truth here was that they were not zebras at all. They were actually horses. And in this case, the organ of hearing was right. The visual organ, what the visual organ was reporting was an appearance. So the third knowledge principle, that every means of knowledge has inherent validity, still holds. Is still true. So now this is a very important principle. So we'll spend some time dwelling on this. So let us take a few examples here. If you take an example of cricket, so there's this batsman who is batting, and there's this fast bowler bowling. You see. And the bowlers bowl at high speeds, like 140 kilometers per hour, 150 kilometers per hour, etc. So when they bowl, he sees this ball coming right in front of him. It's like a bouncer that's coming for his face. So what does he do immediately? He ducks. He ducks to let the ball pass. So in this case, he is trusting his pramana. He is giving it validity, you see. Similarly, there's this athlete who's sitting at the beginning of a race. And then there's this on your marks, get set, go. And the moment he hears this gunshot, he runs because he's waiting for that to be heard. As soon as he hears it, he runs. He gives validity to his organ of hearing. He doesn't question it. Because these people have split second to decide what it is. And they basically surrender to the pramana. Right? There is a certain surrender to the pramana that this I, whatever it is reporting, at that point the bowler doesn't question, is this really, ball is really there? No, he ducks. Similarly, this person, as soon as he hears the gunshot, he runs. And similarly, when I am tasting something, right, and my taste buds say, oh, there is too much salt in this. Then this person has BP. So he says, no, I will not eat this. So again, he's giving validity to what his sense organ of taste reports. So similarly, in the chemistry lab, right, the moment you smell this rotten eggs, we have all done this when we were in school. Then what is the answer we write? We write it's hydrogen sulfide. I trust my organ of smell. Similarly, I'm in a dark room and I want to find a door. So I fumble around, and the moment I feel the doorknob, I turn it. So basically, what we are trying to say is that I am acknowledging this principle that every organ has got this self-validity. Even though I don't explicitly state it, all of my vyavahara in all of my transactions, I'm acknowledging this in terms that I'm giving validity to my organs, to my pramanas. So I take what my senses reveal to be a fact. Right. I take what my senses to be revealed to be a fact. Why do I do that? Because they are the primary means of knowledge in their sphere. They are the primary means of knowledge. I don't have any other means of knowledge that operates in that sphere. In the sphere of colors, my eyes rule that sphere. In the sphere of sounds, my ears rule that sphere. So I take what they reveal to be a fact because I don't have a choice in the matter. And just as basically, if I question what my eyes reveal, then I land into various problems. We will see that. But my eyes basically prove themselves. That is the point. That no other pramana can be used to prove a certain pramana that operates in the sphere of colors. Another pramana cannot prove or disprove it. It operates in a totally different sphere. So the eyes basically prove themselves in their sphere. That is why we say that the eyes have to be given this self-validity in their sphere of operation. So just as fire is inherently hot, similarly, every pramana is inherently self-valid. This is what the third principle is effectively saying. So this is given a term. This property of inherent self-validity is called swatah pramanyam. Swatah pramanyam means that this pramana is inherently self-valid. Now, understanding that a pramana is inherently self-valid is what is called Shraddha. So this Shraddha is basically a very technical term. See, we translate it loosely as faith, etc. But that loose translation causes a lot of issues. Real meaning of Shraddha, if you were to do this inquiry, is that I give a certain pramana inherent self-validity. Basically, I am willing to see that what that pramana is telling me is a fact. Because that pramana is undisputed in its sphere of operation. So this translation as faith causes a lot of issues. Because, see, faith means a certain blind acceptance. There's this idea of a blind acceptance of things. And whenever there is blind acceptance, there is no investigation, there is no inquiry, etc. And therefore, religion has got gets a certain bad name because you see people say this is all based on blind acceptance. This is based on faith, right? Because Shraddha is then translated as faith, and faith is translated as blind acceptance. And then we say that there is all the people who call themselves rationalists, that we are rationalists. We look for proof and reason for everything, right? So they will say all of this, it is all against science. They don't have scientific temper because this is based on faith. And they don't have the spirit of inquiry. Science is based on the spirit of inquiry and spirit of investigation. These people are against it, right? So there's all these things that come in and complicates the picture. So what we say is that there is no real equivalent word for Shraddha. In the Western vocabulary, there is no equivalent word because this investigation into pramanas has not been done. There is no easy translation for this. So basically, according to us, right, the Shraddha is a philosophical necessity. This giving self-validity to pramanas is a philosophical necessity because all knowledge rises through these pramanas. So Shraddha is a philosophical necessity for any knowledge. That is what we are saying. Giving self-validity to the pramana is Shraddha. Because one understands the undisputed nature of the pramana in its field of operation. So what are the philosophical or practical issues that will happen if these pramanas are not given inherent self-validity? Now what it will mean is that what one pramana reveals has to be confirmed by another pramana somehow. So I'm not willing to believe what my eyes are saying. I'm not willing to accept it as a fact. Then I have to confirm it through another pramana. But no other pramana, right? Now, no other pramana has got the inherent self-validity like you are saying. If you are not willing to give pramana's inherent self-validity, then no other pramana has self-validity either. So if you hear something, right, now you can't be sure about that also. Then you have to look for another pramana to confirm what it is saying, right? So what we are saying is there can be no finality in knowledge at all. Yeah, actually, the picture is somewhat worse because if I'm not willing to give self-validity to my eyes and seeing what it is revealing as a fact, then if I'm looking for confirmation from another pramana, it is not just that the other pramana doesn't have inherent self-validity according to you, what this person is saying. It doesn't operate in the field of colors at all. So basically, one will never get that confirmation that one is looking for. One will constantly be in doubt. Therefore, we say only way to gain knowledge of colors is to use the pramana and allow the pramana to prove itself. The pramana has to prove itself. And actually, they prove themselves. This is what our Vyavahara is indicating. We give it self-validity. So, this Shraddha has got a more technical definition. It is called Upajivya Pramana Swatah Pramanya Jnanam Shraddha. That the primary source of knowledge, Upajivya Pramana Swatah Pramanya Jnanam is Shraddha. That I am willing to give a certain pramana self-validity. That I am giving it self-validity because of the understanding that the pramana is undisputed in its sphere of operation. This understanding is Shraddha. So we all have Shraddha in our eyes, what our eyes reveal. We all have Shraddha in what our ears reveal. Like we said, without Shraddha in what my eyes reveal, I'll constantly be looking for confirmation from something else. I will not even be able to place my next foot forward because I don't know if the floor is there or not. So we are saying that we are constantly operating with Shraddha in our pramanas. This is a very important principle. So even a scientist, we say, right? Even a scientist, even they may, not really understand what you're talking about. Even a scientist is operating with Shraddha Shraddha in the various pramanas that are available to the scientist. For example, if you take a look at how these laws of planetary motion were determined, right? So Kepler was sitting there staring at the sky, looking at the motion of every planet. So he painstakingly recorded the location of every planet. So at that point, what was he doing? He was locating the planet as revealed by his eyes. So he was, at that point, even if he did not say that, he had Shraddha in what his eyes revealed. Similarly, if we look at the starting point of the cutting edge of science, if you say quantum physics, etc. How did it all start? It started with this double slit experiment. So in this double slit experiment, the nature of the double slit experiment is that when a wave strikes the double slit, if you have a wave of water, for example, if there's a wave of water, and then you have an obstruction with two slits in it, then the wave of water gets split as two waves on the other side of the obstruction, because the wave of water passes through these slits and it becomes two waves on the other side. And finally, there is this interference pattern that is produced. So now this, whenever an interference pattern is produced, when something passes through two slits, then that is a giveaway that whatever is hitting those two slits is a wave. Right? So even when light is passed through these two slits, an interference pattern is produced on the other side. So they concluded that light has this wave nature. Now what happened is when they passed electrons through these two slits, electrons are considered as particles. So when electrons were passed through two slits, again, shockingly, it produced an interference pattern. And that means that they said electrons should also have a wave-like nature. That is how this whole quantum physics started. Then what was the starting point of quantum physics? That somebody had to observe this interference pattern. At that point, they had Shraddha in what their eyes revealed. So even the scientist, even the most hardened scientist who is confirming that I'm totally rational and I want a proof for everything, even that scientist is operating with a Shraddha. He is giving self-validity to what the eyes are revealing. So this is a very important third principle, that every pramana is self-valid in its sphere of operation. We will continue this discussion because this whole foundation of Vedanta is dependent upon a clean understanding of pramanas. So we will continue this, and I'll conclude right now, and we'll have some time for a few comments and questions. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. If you have any comments.
Yeah. Namaskaram, Swami. This is Rangarajan.
Namaskar.
I have two queries, mostly on the, it falls on the academic point only of Vedanta. Number one is that the snake and the, what is that? Snake and thread, what do you call?
The rope snake example.
Rope snake example or analogy. A person sees rope as a snake, which means that the person should have seen snake already. So that is also a kind of a truth. Only that momentary is not seeing the rope, which means that it does not mean that snake does not exist. Snake does not exist. It exists somewhere else. So it is not unreal, but that momentary it is not real. Which means that in another way, Yesterday had happened. Yesterday is no longer going to happen. That does not mean yesterday is false, correct? Yesterday had happened, that is reality, but yesterday is no longer going to happen. I think this is one question. This is purely an academic point of view, sir. And second question is that generally we talk about the soul reaching to a Brahman by just like a rocket launch happens at each level, the rocket parts gets it, and the satellite gets into the orbit. I can consider the satellite as a soul, and all this Maya and Nitya are kind of a part of the rocket, and the orbit is a Brahman. Okay, we can understand that part from your whatever you have preached to us. But first of all, why Brahman should have this Brahma or a Brahmip to come to the part of the soul? Why you should get that Nitya? I can understand the path from soul to Brahman, but why the soul should have first of all surrendered in Nitya? That's another question. These are two. This is purely on the academic point of view to get a more clarity. Dhanyasmi.
Yeah, so about the first point, right? You are right that we are not negating the snake somewhere else, right? But what we are negating is the snake that was seen at in the location of the rope. The snake that was seen in the location of the rope. I think I'm hearing an echo. So if you can please mute yourself, that will help. Okay. So what is being negated by a subsequent closer investigation is the snake that was seen at the location of the rope, or instead of the rope, the snake was seen. What should have been seen, if the knowledge was valid, is the rope. But instead of the rope, because of not clearly seeing the rope, one made a mistake of taking it to be a snake. So that snake that was seen where the rope is, that is being negated. There may be snakes elsewhere. Maybe in the neighboring garden also, there may be, 100 snakes. We are not negating that possibility. But what we are saying is what you saw was not true. So that is the first point. See, the second point with regards to Brahman having, ignorance, etc., and about this soul going through some modifications, like you described, like a rocket launch, right? That leads to Brahman. So some of those, really speaking, what we say is that the problem is solved by knowledge alone, right? And we said that knowledge doesn't bring about any modification. Knowledge just reveals what is. We said that is the nature. It just discovers what is. So we don't say that there have to be certain modifications for one to become Brahman. In fact, what Vedanta says is you are already Brahman. Right now and here, you are Brahman. It is just that covering of the ignorance that is separating you from Brahman. Just like the covering of the ignorance was separating the 10th man from the 10th man. The 10th man was already the 10th man. So even now, you are Brahman. What is lacking is just that knowledge. So that is what we are saying. So any modification would only be in terms of preparation of the mind in order to know this truth. So this is, we will get into this in a lot more detail later when hopefully, this will become clearer.
Dhanyasmi. Thank you.
Yes, Vishwanathanji.
Yeah. So far, what we have covered till today.
Can you please raise your volume a bit? There is an obstruction in the operation of the pramana of hearing.
Yeah.
So
now
we need
clear?
to.
Now it's clear?
Yes. Now it's clear.
No,
Right.
I switched off my video.
Maybe that's because
Okay,
maybe hindering
much
the.
clearer. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, so far we have discussed the worldly knowledge. So far,
Yeah,
self-knowledge,
yeah.
you just started in the last two classes about what is valid knowledge and invalid knowledge.
Yes, yes.
Now we are talking about in this class about the sensory organ, what is their role to fix the knowledge, to know about the actual truth. Now, my only question here is, we are all able to see, we are all able to sense with all our sensory organs. In case of people who are blind and deaf and dumb,
Yeah.
does Vedanta says or any guidance for them to know the worldly knowledge before they progress towards the self-knowledge? I may be asking a absurd question, I do not know, but I thought this question came to my mind when you are teaching about this. If you can explain that, that will be great.
So basically, we said that there are certain, there's this necessity. Let's go back to that first knowledge principle, right? So the operation has to be of the pramanas has to be unobstructed. It has to be adequate for any knowledge to take place.
Correct.
So in some cases, the obstruction are simple. For example, one may have, a blockage in the ear, and you go to the ear doctor and he puts the syringe and removes the obstruction, right?
Yeah.
Or there may be a cataract and you have a cataract surgery that removes the obstruction.
Correct.
Now, we say that in some cases, the obstruction may be a more powerful obstruction. For example, if somebody is congenitally blind or deaf, right? Now, that's a very powerful obstruction caused by prarabdha karma.
Correct.
So, in that kind of a situation, right? I mean, even gaining worldly knowledge of colors and sounds, etc., becomes impossible for that person. Unless, of course, there are advances in medical technology which suddenly fix that obstruction somehow, in which case that would be a positive prarabdha karma that counters the negative prarabdha and removes that obstruction. So in some cases, if the prarabdha karma of this person is so powerful that it creates an obstruction that cannot be removed by anything else, then we say it is very difficult for this person to gain certain kinds of knowledge in that janma.
Clear. He has to undergo the karma's effect, cause and effect in this janma, and then probably whatever he gains as a punya, probably next janma, probably he may come to the worldly knowledge.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
For me, today's session was excellent. I mean, because it is taking a very complex and a nuanced subject of knowledge itself, and you made the right distinction between those three principles on how to get it. So very, very keen to see where it goes in the next classes.
Yeah.
Today's session was
One of the
fantastic.
things that is worth mentioning here, you are extremely right that this is a subtle inquiry, right? It's a very subtle topic. And this has been plumbed to in depth in our Shastras. See, that is the glory of it. That such a thing that we almost take for granted, right? Or we actually misunderstand things because we have not been exposed to these ideas.
Correct.
So it is actually a very eye-opening. It's an eye-opening, and in fact, in this was something that I myself had not heard before, and this was actually an eye-opening phase in my own sadhana when I first heard
Wonderful.
about this.
Right. It's very, very subtle, very nuanced, and each shade is very different. And when I heard it first time, it is completely contradictory to our day-to-day transactions also. So that is where it is becoming very interesting. Very keen for the next subjects. But like you said, the very application of this thought itself, what do you call Brahmipu? I mean, it's a very sorry, I'm not getting the right word. In Tamil, we can say it is Brahmipu. That is what it is. Very nice. Thank you.
I want to say
Basically-
something.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
See, I have read a few things. I mean, I've read through all your topics, and these subjects were introduced there. And the clarity, I mean, when we read, we understand something, but it's only part knowledge. It's not, but the importance of Guru is very clear in this concept right now, because when we're directly hearing from you, there is a lot of difference. And at least in my past, in my younger days, I used to read a lot of books. I used to, think through and get nowhere and get more and more confused. But I never understood the importance of a guru. But I can clearly see the difference right now, and I really appreciate for that. Thank you.
Yeah, like I've always said, that what I am talking about here is what I have heard from my guru. So all of these things that I'm talking about, I'm trying to present it as I've heard from my guru.
Sir, we are looking forward to the specific term you are talking about, the appropriate knowledge to know the self. We are more interested to know about that, sir.
Yes, and this
Worldly
background,
knowledge-
right?
Yeah, worldly
This
knowledge we
background.
are not keen. Self-knowledge is more important.
Yes. So this background about pramanas, right?
Yeah.
It extends to self-knowledge also.
Okay.
So we will come to that. In fact, we will come
you.
to that
Thank
in the
you.
next few classes. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting, sir. Thank you. I don't want to miss any of your class, wherever I am. Thank you.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om Satyan. Namaste ji.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.